All right, and we are live. Now, today's guest, I managed to pronounce her name correctly off screen, but it turns out I've been saying the name of an organization incorrectly the whole time. Today we have Kelly Thiel, formerly of
NXIVM.
NXIVM. You see, I always say Nexium like a medication. I don't is it sleep medicine or Dramamine or something like that, but I know there was like a Nexium on the market, so it's always stuck in my head. So it's NXIVM. How are you doing today, Kelly?
I'm doing great. And the NXIVM is an antacid, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Which it makes sense.
Well, if you think about it, it's I imagine you had some degree of, no pun intended, heartburn in dealing with your situation.
Yes,
But
we all did.
I have actually spoken with Nikki Klein, who I wouldn't even say is formerly of NXIVM. From what I understand, she's still pretty much a believer in what was going on and is a staunch defender of Keith Raniere and on the other side. So I want to put that out there, and I've gone back and forth to have her on. So far, we've not been able to work it out, but it's a weird thing because, in my opinion, and I wasn't there, and this is why I want to get all sides. Two things can be true at once. I think
Correct.
that NXIVM could be a cult, and I think that Keith Raniere could have maybe had some of his charges finessed a little bit. So there could have been corruption in the prosecution, and he could be a cult leader. Both can be true. I don't know, but I watched Seduced back a while ago when it came out in 2020, or was it? When did that come out? It's been a while.
2020 it came out.
It did. Okay, everything's running together. So I did watch that, and I saw your appearances on there, and I was really excited to get an introduction to you. And I would love to hear your experiences, how you got into the organization. I always hesitate to use cult because cult is a loaded term. So I do try to say organization or whatever, and I throw allegedly around a lot and different things because we can get into some terms, and I don't want to get anybody feeling uncomfortable.
Right. Thank you. Well, I was introduced to NXIVM back in 2016. And I was a seeker, like many people, and I was really looking for a way to really feel okay. I was kind of in a dark place in my life, and I was really searching. And so someone introduced me to the organization, and it was explained to me as a self-help organization. They had this amazing curriculum, and I was told that the man who made this curriculum was a genius, and they were helping people all over the world. So being a seeker and not always, at that point in my life, not always thinking things completely through, I kind of jumped into it, thinking that this was going to be the thing that was going to save me.
Now, when you say
So I got
seeker,
involved.
do you mean like in a religious connotation, or just kind of spiritual? How would you define that?
So from a young age, I'd always been trying to answer all these big questions. You know, are we alone in the universe? Where did we come from? What else is there? Is reincarnation real? And so from as far back as I can remember, probably 8 or 10 years old, I'd been reading books like Michener's The Source, and books that would try to answer these questions. And so it was sort of a spiritual, and my life did move on into spiritual things. And I'd studied Buddhism, and I've studied different religions. So I was kind of all encompassing, just trying to figure it all out, basically.
Okay. And I asked that because where I've always thought NXIVM was a little different than some. Like, I was speaking before the show, I had Christine Babin on, who is part of the Children of God, which is very specifically a religious cult, whatever. Anyway, and I got the impression that NXIVM kind of leaned more on the Scientology side of things, like almost like an MLM, but not. I don't know.
Yeah, so NXIVM did have an MLM element to it. So the sales part of NXIVM really was broken down in that way. It was really a human potential organization. So there wasn't any religion involved in it, and there really wasn't any so-called spirituality involved, but there was a mission to make the world a better place. And there was this mission to raise our human potential and basically seeking enlightenment. So that's kind of how it was. So it was kind of a mix of an MLM along with a human potential organization, mixed with a mission, to help the world.
Okay, Fallen Zone G in the chat. This is a good question. So more of a lifestyle than a religion?
Yeah, it was very much a lifestyle. There was a whole community of people that were living this lifestyle. Many of us were vegetarians. Many of us were just really seeking to be better people at the end of the day. That's what the lifestyle was really about. It was about being kind to your fellow human beings. It's about being a human being and working your way to being a better human being.
Okay, and that is actually fertile ground for a cult recruitment. A lot of people, I've talked to different experts. I mentioned it to you earlier, but Rick Allen Ross and Ian Haworth, and there's a misperception that people going into cults maybe are lost or gullible or whatever. And they both have pointed out that usually people who are very aware, I'm not trying to use the term do-gooders as a pejorative, but really, care about the world, very environmentally conscious, things like that. People who may wind up being an activist or marching for something are prime for recruitment. Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't necessarily say that people who are activists are open for recruitment. I think people who are vulnerable and are looking for something, that they feel that they're missing something, I think those people are more ripe for recruitment into these type of things. I think the mission just adds to who the person wants to be, but the vulnerability, I believe, lies in they're thinking that they need something outside of themselves. And I write a lot about this in my book, needing something outside of the self to be okay. And that's where we start to lose our power and give it away, when we believe there's something else with the answer.
Okay, that makes sense. And the thing is that this is where the lines get blurred, because
Mm-hmm.
you start to segregate yourselves from society. Like in any organization, it gets like that. It gets kind of insular, and you don't necessarily have good contact with family, friends, or anything outside. Is that something you've seen?
That happens during the indoctrination process. So the whole idea, once you get someone into an organization like this, where it's a controlled organization, like a high control or high demand group, is they're trying to keep you attentive to what's going on in the organization. So that doesn't include the outside world, because the outside world wouldn't understand what's going on. So that it starts to become a language of its own. And you start to feel like, oh, they're not going to understand what I'm talking about. But everyone in this community, they get me. They understand what I'm talking about. So naturally, there starts to become an us and a them. And that starts to come out in the conversation. And that's in the conversations within the organization. And that's one of the flags that I definitely missed. Looking back, once I left NXIVM, I was able to see these flags for what they actually were. And actually realizing that I was having these conversations saying, oh, they wouldn't understand this whole us and them mentality. So that's really definitely a big flag for
Well,
these types of organizations.
can you describe and just tell us about your indoctrination? I mean, obviously you went through something, and nothing is more clarity than your personal experience. What happened?
Well, when I joined the organization, I just had signed up for a 5-day, 5-day, it's like there were classes. There was a
Seminar?
16-day course. It was like a seminar. They called it curriculum. So
Okay.
they were classes basically, and they stretched out to 16 days. That was the full curriculum for that part. I signed up for 5 days. And the first couple of days were very, what is this? I don't really get it. They're using these different words. They're changing the meaning of words. And I thought, this is just kind of baloney. And then after about the third day, things started to kind of click, and I started to feel a little better. I started to feel like, okay, like this could actually work. This curriculum's starting to make sense. So I ended up taking the next 10 days. I flew to Albany. The first 5 days were in Los Angeles. I hopped on a plane, did the next 11 days in Albany, New York, and I loved it. So I was super excited. By the end of 16 days, everybody's excited. Everybody's feeling good. Everybody's connected. Everybody's getting something out of it. And everybody's really excited. So they asked me to become a coach. And I thought, okay, this curriculum is starting to change my life. I'm starting to feel like I can reach my goals. I can do the things that I want to do.
And
And I
this is in
decided to
16
become 16 days. Now,
Okay.
normally people take it 5 days, and then maybe they'll take another 5 days, and then they'll take the last 6 days. I took it all straight in a row, which is somewhat unusual. And for me, I loved the community. I loved the teachers. I loved everything about it. And they asked me to become a coach. So I became a coach very quickly. And I thought, this is going to be my purpose. I'm going to be able to help people feel good. I'm going to help people to get to know themselves, to work through the relationship problems, to become better people. So I was super on board. And over a period of time, spending a lot of time with the community, a lot of time with Nancy Salzman, and a
Yeah,
lot
I
of people
wanted
that have
to
been in the
go into that.
news. Yeah.
Was Nancy when you did your first 2 days? Who was conducting it? Was it Nancy? Or was it Keith? Who was actually
The first
bringing you?
five, Jim Del Negro, and he recently passed away
Mm,
last month. Very, very sad. So he was the teacher of that 16 days that I did. I went on to do a lot more curriculum where Nancy was teaching Jeunesse and
what is
classes like
Jeunesse?
that. Jeunesse was basically a curriculum that included men, and it was how men and women work together as a unit, but it was also very misogynistic and put women at the bottom of the totem pole, and men were the ones that were in power. Now, this was done over the course of 15 or 16 days. And
Mm,
so you're getting it little bits at a time, and you're kind of pushing back on it. Like I was pushing back on a lot of things, but then some of the things would sort of make sense. And so it was another full on indoctrination process into getting women into subservient positions, which was feeding. So Jeunesse was actually feeding many of the women into DOS. So it
okay.
was sort of
Now,
like a prep for DOS.
that was something that I noticed now because I'm watching a documentary on it. I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to always assume that it's a little bit of a hit job. That doesn't mean that's not true, but documentarians don't go, "Oh, let's find the most boring part of the day." They're
Right.
always going to amp everything up. And one thing I noticed is it seemed like there were very few men in the organization, at least from what I had seen. Was it a pretty balanced thing, or
I think it was fairly balanced. It might have been slightly skewed toward women, but there was
okay?
quite a few men involved. I think the women were the ones that were uh, the most manipulated in the organization, for sure.
Mhm.
So that's why you're probably seeing more of their stories in these documentaries, because they're the ones with the stories.
Yeah, and it's the splashy. I mean, obviously the branding and all the stuff that was like, oh my god, that's more
Mhm.
exciting and titillating. But I was just curious about that because it seems, well, that's not uncommon that women, I feel, get victimized in organizations.
Well,
That's
especially if if the control is coming from the top and it's male dominated, yes, that's going to happen, I think.
Yeah, there's a rude comment. It's good to be king, but it's kind.
Yeah.
That's just saying. It's
Well,
like there's a reason why some of these people start these organizations, and
yeah, yeah.
it's not always ennobling. Now, in your initial indoctrination, I was asking if Nancy Salzman was involved, and I think you probably know where I'm going with it. But
Mhm.
she was very deep into NLP and
Correct.
hypnosis, and you had mentioned that it was like 2 days of kind of what, and then it started to feel right. As you look back, and I'm sure you've studied things, is that what was occurring with you? Were they using NLP and gaslighting you? would be the best way to
So they were
put it.
using, yes, NLP, and Nancy was actually teaching the courses through videos. So there was a
Okay.
video that we would see with her teaching the course, and then the head trainer, Del Negro in this case, he was basically debriefing all of the videos. So yes, there was NLP involved. It was a bit hypnotic when I look back at it, watching the videos. Not to mention that, we had 12 and 14-hour days. So you're tired, and when you're tired, you're not always thinking straight. And when you're being quizzed about things like what is the meaning of good, and you try to explain what does a good mean? You're racking your brain trying to come up with a definition of good, and everybody has different ones, and then they give you their definition. So your brain
And
is
that's a
already
relief.
open.
It's a
Yes, your
relief.
brain
It's
is
like, oh God.
open.
Oh yeah, that's it.
There it
That's it.
is. Oh,
Oh,
that's the one. Yeah. So then things start to slowly change the meanings of things that that support where they're going in the organization.
no,
And
that
it
makes
helps to
total
control
sense.
people.
You also mentioned that you're vegetarians, and this is not a criticism of vegetarians. I'm just wondering. Another tactic is malnourishment. So while you were
Correct.
tired, were you also a little bit hungry?
So they did not encourage, one of the things that Nixon talks about, especially Keith, was comfort. So if you're always in comfort, you're not pushing yourself, you're not growing. So they encourage you to be uncomfortable. And one of the things to be uncomfortable with was food. So you don't really need to eat that much food. You don't always need to be full. So they sort of, the organization pushed comfort to push the people, to push
That's
the people within
interesting.
the organization. Does that make sense?
Well, what's
So,
funny about it is there's actually a lot of science and stoicism and other things would support that. So it sounds like they're taking something that has some truth to it, that if you
correct.
don't have any kind of challenges or gravity, then you can never rise up or gain strength because you don't push against anything, and maybe take it a little bit further. So that's a very interesting tactic.
hmm And they did that with a lot of things. If you are uncomfortable, that's a good thing. Well, it can be a good thing, but it can also go too far with the discomfort. Like a lot of the ladies within DOS with their dieting, we're down to 500 calories a day, and we're losing, they were very malnourished. And when you're malnourished, you can't think straight.
Right.
But going back to my experience, I wasn't dieting per se, but I certainly wasn't overeating, especially during these when I was coaching, 14-hour days. I was tired. I was probably underfed, definitely not sleeping enough. And so when I was being asked to do some of these things, you don't fight back. You just kind of do it to get through the day.
That makes
So
sense.
there's a
And
lot. Yeah.
was a lot of your indoctrination straight out compliance? Like as in, get up, raise your hand. Are you this? Stand up if you're this. You should do that.
There was
Just deliberately kind of repeat after me type of things, which very NLP-ish.
there was some of that, but there was a lot of what they called feedback.
Mm,
And feedback was basically criticism to what you're not doing right. And when you receive enough criticism, you kind of just want to go with the flow, so you're not getting it all the time. So it becomes a type of punishment.
sure.
And I just wanted, for me, my whole goal was to get to this place that I thought was going to be enlightenment. That
Mhm.
Nixon was promising. If I could get through the stripe path, I would get to this place where it'd be like nirvana in a way. They didn't use the word nirvana, but it was like it
Sure.
was going to be this place. And so I was pretty much willing to do whatever it took to get there. And when you become tired and malnourished and not thinking straight, you start to do things that are really outside your comfort zone, and things that you normally wouldn't do.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially okay, fatigue. Somebody who's fatigued and driving is more dangerous than a drunk driver. That's already been
Could
proven.
be.
So, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, enough fatigue can bring on psychosis. It is a
absolutely.
very, very, very constant. And I could see where even when you were coaching, it wouldn't be necessarily that food was withheld, you just didn't have time. And so
There
you
was
go
that
hour after
element,
hour and you just no time
definitely.
and you're busy and you're doing it. And you kind of get on a repetitive motion to where it just starts to sustain itself. Does that make sense? Or is it kind of like
Yeah,
that?
it becomes a cycle, right? It becomes a cycle. And then if your peers are pushing you because they're pushing themselves, and then you have your higher ups pushing you as well, you start to believe that to think outside the box, you're doing something wrong. So you stop using your critical thinking skills. And when
Now,
that happens, yeah.
no, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying, that happens to people and they don't even realize it. I mean, looking back, I can see where I stopped using my critical thinking skills. But it's really imperative, I think, for people to understand that this process of indoctrination happens over time. So you don't just wake up in the morning and stop using your critical thinking skills. It
Sure.
happens like a drop, like the
Mm,
frog in the boiling pot. It happens over time. And
mhm.
so that's what happened to me, is I just sort of stopped thinking and just kept doing, just to keep up.
That makes sense. Now, I'm curious though, because not everybody's necessarily cooperative. So how did they deal with, shall we say, people who maybe just didn't get with the program as quickly or were not as cooperative? I mean, did they just kick them out, or were there
Well,
ways to, what would be a method of controlling a smartass like me?
so a method of controlling would be to turn what you're doing back on yourself. That, hey, Eric, you're saying these things, and maybe it's because you really don't want to grow. Maybe that's the problem. Do you want to grow, Eric? And if that's
Mm,
something that you really want to do, you're going to look at yourself and go, yeah, I kind of want to grow. Maybe I should listen and see what they have to say, if that's something important to you. But if it's not important to you, you probably would have left the organization in the first couple of classes. So if there was a problem with a student, they were taken aside and the problem was made them. They were made the problem. Very
mm.
problem students that were extreme problems, were pretty much asked to leave, or they left on their own. But everyone else that was left really wanted to grow. So they were there to grow, and they were told, we know you want to grow. So why don't you just stop for a second and listen to what we have to say so that you can. You're just, you're curbing your own growth here. You're curbing your own self. So why don't you listen? And so people would look at that and say, well, maybe I am. And they'd second guess themselves, instead of some of the people like myself in the beginning who kind of wanted to leave and didn't, and was sort of talked back into it for my own growth. Does that make sense?
Sure, sure. And I mean, were you also participating in helping others grow? I mean,
Of
obviously it's
course,
used against
yeah.
you, but you might have been, shall we say, somebody correcting other people, especially being a coach.
Absolutely. I was implementing exactly what was being told to me. So I thought I was growing. And so the methods that they were using were helping me to grow. So I'm using those methods on people with the full intention of, I'm helping this person grow. Isn't that great? But really, what I was doing was just mimicking what was happening to me, and not understanding at the time what was happening to me. So I was helping to indoctrinate new people, just as I had been indoctrinated, but I didn't have this bad intent. And I don't think people in the organization like myself had bad intent. I mean, you've got the front office of an
Mhm.
organization and you kind of have the back office. And I was sort of in the front office, helping and working and not understanding exactly what repercussions these could have on people, because I didn't even understand it for myself.
Okay, now f- I got the impression from the documentary, and I don't assume naturally that everybody is hanging with a leader or whatever, but I got the feeling that you were high enough in coaching and whatever else that you did have time with Keith. And I don't know if you got to know him or at least just met him, but did you have any kind of relationship with him?
I did not have a relationship with Keith. I met him early on.
Mhm.
So when I was in my 16-day, and this should have been a flag for me, but it was not. It did feel like uncomfortable when they asked me to meet him, like I think on like day 7 or something. And at first I said no. This is when I was a student. I really wanted to go back to my hotel and just go to sleep. And I was approached by 2 or 3 people and said, "You have to go meet Keith tonight. Like, Keith doesn't want to just meet anybody. You can't say no." And I'm like, "Well, I'm really tired." And so one of the other coaches offered to drive me to volleyball, because that's where Keith met everyone, was a volleyball game at night that started about 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
He offered to drive me to meet Keith, and then he promised to drive me right back to my hotel room. And so I eventually just kind of acquiesced, and I went, and I thought it was really weird. I'm like, why does he want to meet me? And so I went to meet him. He came out from the volleyball game. We chatted for a few minutes. He asked me if I was a hugger. I didn't really know what that meant at first. And I said, do I like to hug? And he said, yeah. And I said, I guess. And so he gave me a hug. I thought it was kind of creepy. I was very disappointed I expected to have this man that was going to be just like super charismatic and
Smartest
just
guy in the world.
full of life and like the smartest man in the world, and who had it all together. And he was, wearing volleyball shorts, and he just looked like any Joe Schmo off the streets. And we chatted for a few minutes. He said, I know all about you. You came from LA. And I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. And he said, everybody says you're doing really great with the curriculum. And I thought, okay, that's kind of nice. So he was very complimentary, and it felt good. I started to feel kind of special, like, oh, wow, okay. Even though I was sort of still feeling this is kind of a weird situation, I still felt that it was like this special thing. So that was my first experience with him.
Before you go to the second,
Mhm.
you mentioned that they were saying, hey, not just anybody gets to meet him. What were the requirements for somebody to be qualified to meet him?
Well, I think some of the requirements were, and this is obviously after the fact, but anyone with resources or a big, Rolodex with a lot of, people, a lot of contacts. Those were people that were very important to NXIVM, because they would help to recruit more people. They would help to get the word out. They would help to donate resources into the organization, things like that. So I have a pretty big contact list through Young Presidents Organization, which some of the coaches knew about. And so I think I was sort of highlighted for that.
So is it like Scientology with Tom Cruise and John Travolta, some big name A-listers, if you will, to attract and help on recruitment?
That's what they were looking for. And I think that, that's where Allison and Mack kind of came in, and Nikki Klein, and a lot of the actors that were in NXIVM. Though that was sort of, it helped to recruit people. If you have someone like, Allison Mack calling you, and you understand what Smallville is. I had never seen Smallville, but if you're in that genre, or you like that genre, and and Allison Mack's paying attention to you, and she's recruiting you, that could be very helpful for NXIVM to get people in. It gives it legitimacy.
Okay. And sorry to interrupt. So definitely tell me at the second time. I'm just trying to get that. I kind of had a feeling that a third one might be either a ton of connections or an attractive female, but I could be wrong.
Well, I think attractive. Okay. That could be it too. I mean, I'm sure that was part of his thing. I think I'm a little too old for him personally, but I think that definitely the younger girls were definitely attractive to him. My second my second experience with him was at what we called Vanguard Week, V Week. That was his birthday, a 12-day event at Lake George. And he had little, he would come up and speak in the evenings in the auditorium. And I hung out with him one night there, and just, talking and answering questions and things like that. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with him, but what I did have was a lot of feedback about who he was. It was constant reinforcement about him being the smartest man in the world, him being the most ethical man in the world. All of the reinforcement that came with being Keith Raniere, that you hear it enough times from enough people, you start to at least I started to believe it.
It's like L. Ron Hubbard, who had the nuclear degree, who had this, and is the most prolific writer in the world, right? No, he actually was prolific. I didn't say he was talented, but he was prolific. He wrote a lot of books. But Yeah, it is. Then that makes sense. If you respect the people who you are around, and then they all say this is great, this person's great, then
Yeah.
I mean
It starts
that's
to become, I mean, if you're around a community of people enough, you start to drink the Kool-Aid because it's all there is. It's all around you all the time. You start to believe it. Even if you question a little bit, you think, well, I don't really have all the data on it. And that was a big thing with NXIVM as well, was if you don't have data on it, then how do you know it's not true?
mhm.
And that's another, another flag too. Just because there isn't data doesn't mean it's not true. Just because you don't have data doesn't mean it's not true.
All true.
Hmm.
So okay, so and so you didn't have a ton of experience with him, and I made an assumption that you may or may not have. In these organizations, the quote leader doesn't necessarily hang out with everybody all the time.
Correct.
Now, earlier you gave me the impression though you had a lot of experience with Nancy Salzman.
Yes, and during Jeunesse, when we were in Mexico City, I did that curriculum for 16 days in 15 days in 5-day chunks. And so I spent quite a bit of time with her because she was teaching that. And she actually helped me quite a bit in a lot
Hmm.
of things that I was struggling with. And so, and it was all NLP. So, but then there's the other side of it as well that was not so helpful. But I did spend quite a bit of time with her, getting to know her, and yeah. So she
So
was.
what was her place in it? I mean, like, okay, they have Keith as the big figurehead, and
Mhm.
I can't help but look at it and say, without Nancy Salzman, he couldn't do half of what he did. Am I incorrect in my thoughts or opinions?
No, I believe you're correct. So I believe, and I wasn't there when all this was happening, but I believe that his idea for the curriculum, he would come up with the idea and she would put it into a way to, and actually on paper as a way to learn it.
Mhm.
So no, I don't think he could have done that. I think he needed her to do that because she was a teacher. She was able to put it in a format that was understandable. Um, did she know what was going on with everything? I don't know if anybody knew everything that was going on because there were so many secrets and lies and disinformation within the organization. I really don't know what people knew and what they didn't because it was so hard for me just to find out any information about what was going on when it all started to come apart. It was hard to get anything from anybody, and everybody was lying and covering things up.
Well, yeah, it sounds completely crazy.
It was.
So who else did you know? Because I feel like there was definitely a hierarchy. I mean, they have the whole DOS structure where they show kind of like a chain of command, and I've gotten the impression that Nancy Salzman was, if not like right under him, supposedly almost like a partner. Allison Mack was extremely high up the ladder. I think
Hmm.
Nikki was a little under Allison. I don't know,
She was
or to the
under a
side.
bit. She was under a bit. I didn't spend a lot of time with Nikki Klein at all. I
Mhm.
spent quite a bit of time with Allison. Claire Bronfman was up there as well.
Money.
Um, yes, she contributed quite a bit to what he was trying to accomplish. So I knew pretty much everybody. I didn't know a lot of the gals that were in DOS that were from Mexico City. I didn't know a lot of them. I knew a few of them. But everyone that was pretty much from the US, I knew or worked with in Albany or had definitely relationships with.
Okay, so can you tell us about Allison and what that was like? Because right now, she's the figurehead most known for it with
Yeah.
Keith. And I want to be fair to her and everybody else because to me, you get an impression that in an organization like this, that everybody's like, doing weird spells or doing whatever. And I'm guessing that 90% of the time it's pretty boring, pretty pedestrian. You just go in, do something, do your job, whatever. So what was that like? What was she like?
Allison Mack I met her during my first 16 days. She was actually my coach during
Hmm.
the middle part there. And she was an actress. I had never met her before. I didn't know who she was. She told me about Smallville, and she was very kind to me. She was a little. What was really interesting looking back on this I did pick up that she was very distracted, and she was kind of fly in and fly out. And looking back now, I realize why, because that's when DOS was really getting into full swing, right around that time. So she was happy. She's kind of happy-go-lucky, and I did notice her from the time that I was spent that time with her during the 16-day until when we were all in Jeunesse together in Mexico City, that she started shrinking. And I also noticed that she was eating like shredded vegetables into spaghetti, like you take squash and you make it into spaghetti. I noticed she was eating that a lot, and she was like, "This is so good." And I was like, "Sister, that's like not even a snack, like where are the potato chips?" She's like, "No, this is like so good." And she was really into it. And I thought, that's really strange. But, it's like everyone in NXIVM kind of had their thing that they were doing. And it was, you really wasn't okay to like question it. Everything was like, okay, if that's what you want to do, okay, just support that. That's good, as long as it's supporting you being a good human being, which supports the mission of helping the world. So if it all fit into that, it was all good. So she and I had a fairly nice relationship. I mean, we weren't super close, but when we were together, she was always very supportive of me, always asking how I was doing. And I had no issues with her whatsoever.
Okay, so who were you under ultimately? I mean, if because you were getting recruited, I think at some point to possibly be in DOS, but that would be by someone in DOS.
Yeah, so that was someone in DOS, and I prefer not to use her name.
Okay, fair enough.
But yes, so she recruited me and was asking me to come into this organization of women who were trying to be more measurable and accountable. And she thought that, and she was a superior to me, and she believed that this would be a really good move for me as I went up the stripe path in order to get myself into a better place of being stronger and more measurable. And I was at that point starting to get really tired. And so I was starting to kind of fall apart a little bit more often than normal. And they looked at that about not being measurable enough, not being accountable enough. And they are pushing me. And so I saw myself as like, okay, if I'm going to make it in this organization and get to where I want to go, then I probably need to be more measurable and accountable. So I listened to her and I heard what she had to say. And there came a point in the conversation where she started talking about collateral. And I said, what kind of collateral? And she said, well, like a house deed or a bank account, or, you could even do a video that talks about your business, which was an energy healing practice at the time, that you're a fake, that you're a fraud, that you are pulling the wool over people's eyes. And I thought to myself, okay, well, of all those collateral, that would be the easiest one to do. And then I caught myself and I thought, oh my God, what am I thinking? Like collateral, I mean, this would bring my family into it. This would bring my husband into it. This would put everything at risk. And so I got out of that conversation, fortunately, because the dinner was ending. And for the next couple of weeks, I sort of avoided this person. I didn't really take the phone calls because I didn't want to give the collateral, but I didn't want to say no either, because I thought that would stifle me within the organization. Like it would stifle my growth, and, I wouldn't be able to move up. Now, I didn't understand what DOS was because they didn't tell you what it was. They just said it was this organization of kick-ass women who are doing things in the world that are to be more accountable, be more measurable, and you would be a great fit. That's really all I knew. And that in order to tell you more, I would have to give the collateral in order for them to tell me more. It's a collateral that caught me. That really woke me up and stopped me because, and I write a lot about this in my book, it was like my physical body went off. Like I had numbed myself to a point within the organization. I had numbed myself, so I wasn't feeling anything anymore. I was tired, I was hungry, I was all of these things. I wasn't thinking, but I was numb, and my body went off in a way that's like, wake up and smell the coffee. So I was dealing with that for probably a couple of weeks and avoiding talking to this person when the Frank report came out about the branded slaves. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, this isn't real. I mean, Frank report, this is bullshit, like we all know that he doesn't well, Frank Pilardo was onto something, and he really did have the truth here. And I was reading through this article, and I finally got to the word collateral, and I went,
And they
oh
went
my God,
being
collateral. So I called this person and I said, is this what you were trying to get me to do? And she said, yes. And from that point on, it all just went unraveled.
okay. Before we go into the unraveling, because I definitely want to know all that. I was going to ask earlier, but I wasn't sure relationship at the time. But my bell, bell went off in my head when I heard you say my husband. So was your husband with the organization too?
My husband took a few classes, but he was very busy, didn't have time to continue. And he was building a business. And so he didn't really know what I was doing within the organization.
Okay.
And I kept it very separate, because if you and I were friends and we're
Mhm.
having coffee and you know me, and I start talking a little bit about NXIVM and you start saying, what?
Yeah.
I know you're not on board with me. So then all of a sudden I sort of become the old Kelly in order to keep you from asking questions. So there was
Okay.
sort of two of me in a way. There was the NXIVM Kelly, and then there was the Orange County Kelly. And so my husband only really saw that part because I didn't
Were you
complain to him
living
about how hard
in
it
New
was
York?
working.
Were you living in New York or Orange County?
No, I was living in Orange County, and I was flying back
Okay.
to Albany to do to help coach. But we also had a lot of um, intensives in Los Angeles as well, and Orange County. So I was working them all, and I would fly back to Albany as needed.
Okay. So
So
maybe just maybe
mhm.
the distance helped your body to react when things felt a little bit weird. Like if you had actually been living in Albany on compound at the time,
Mhm.
do you think it might have been more difficult for you
Um,
not
that's a
having a
good
husband?
question.
No.
That's, well, not having a husband, definitely. And I think living in Albany under the umbrella with everyone all the time may have changed the course of things for me. I'm not certain. It's hard to tell
Mhm.
because one never knows where one's breaking point is. You
Sure,
just don't
sure.
know. I went way further than I thought, looking back, that I would ever go. Um, So that's a very good question. I don't really know. I think it's easier to manipulate people when they're completely out of
Mhm.
their element. And me being in California probably gave some buffer to that. Um, I
So I
don't
think it's
really know.
important to know because it's hard to explain, but we all have relatives that we're worried about getting caught up into something.
Yes.
And so knowing anything that can kind of shred the tethers or cause the distance um, is all incredibly valuable. And these destructive organizations, the damage can go on forever. I mean, I had
Hmm.
a Scientologist on here. And it took him years of therapy. Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
I think he said that he couldn't even talk about it for a decade.
Yeah.
Some real numbers. I mean, this is some really scarring stuff, and I'm kind of trying to understand the different angles and not be critical or anything, just understand and think of how do you unring that bell, albeit it's going to be
Well,
slow.
it's very difficult. I mean, when I first, okay, I was only in the organization for a little over 2 years,
Mhm.
barely. You have people that are in organizations like this for decades, right? So when I got out, I was ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I didn't want to talk to anyone about
Sure.
it. I just
I'm a
wanted it to
dupe.
go.
Yeah.
I just felt so stupid and I just wanted it to go away. And the thing that really saved me was I had some really great therapy, but I
Mhm.
also started journaling and I started writing about my experience. And through the writing of my experience, I was able to actually see what I had done, take responsibility for my part in it, and really see it for what it was, but also see the humanity in it. Like, we all make mistakes, we're all not perfect. And so
Sure.
through all of that, I came to this place of owning my story, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I think being able to own your story in any situation, and not just a cult situation, but any experience that's not a great experience, if you can own it and just say, yep, that was me, I did it. This is what I learned. You can let go of all that shame and blame because it doesn't matter anymore because you own it. It's yours, right? And you can say whatever you want. You can try to shame or blame me, but it really doesn't matter because I already owned it. So yeah, I did it. Yeah. What else? What's next? So I think for me, that really worked. But for some people, like maybe who've been in Scientology or some of these other organizations for years and years and years, it's not really that easy to undo all of the indoctrination and the mind, control and all of that. It's doable, but it is difficult. But I think the longer you're in it, the harder it is to get out.
It's fascinating hearing that. Because I can only go by, little interviews and tweets and whatever, but Nikki Klein almost makes the same statements
Oh,
from a
really?
different side. Well, her stance is that we made a choice. We're in this
Yeah.
everybody was here at their own free will, their own volition. Everybody take responsibility for what you are, who you are, anything on it. And I just find that very, very interesting because you both have, different outcomes and different views, but some of the core messages aren't bad. And I think that's maybe that's why it's so slippery, so dangerous, is that you could take
Well,
something good and it can get, because I do believe in, taking responsibility and internalizing and, oh, I made a choice and all that. And so
yeah.
some of what she's saying, I'm like, I can sort of see that. I can sort of see that.
Well, if there weren't something good in the curriculum, no one would have stayed. So there was a lot of great ideas within the curriculum about taking responsibility for your life and choices that you make. But the problem is when your choices are bounded, right? When you're not given all of the information upon making a choice,
Right.
is that really fair? And is that really a choice? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, so you have to really look at what's actually going on. And so within NXIVM, there were a lot of great things that I learned and a lot of things that I still use today. It would not have attracted someone like me or people that are, brilliant artists or very intellectual people. It attracted everybody because there was good stuff in there. The problem
How do
is
you
it got changed.
I know I loved it. I love hearing that because there was a part of me though where I would feel like, oh, I learned this. Oh, damn it, that came from them. They're bad. This is bad. So
That does happen.
how do you react, or do you when you realize, oh shit, I'm using that damn technique from that organization, even though it is a good technique, but I don't like where it came from. How do you reconcile that?
Well, first of all, it's like you got to use your own filter to decide what works for you and what doesn't, what
Mhm.
is good for you and what's bad. And so I just took all the good stuff and I tossed out all the bad stuff. I just kept what
Okay.
made sense for me. And I just made sure that I ran it through my filter and used my critical thinking to make sure that it was something that was good in my life, something that was useful in my life. And there actually were quite a few things that were. So
Do you
one
have
of
a
the things,
checkpoint for your critical thinking? And I'm not trying to be mean, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was the guy who created Sherlock Holmes, probably the top person
mhm,
in the world critical thinking, and he absolutely believed in mediums and ghosts, and even pictures where you could see the nails that were holding up the fake statues. He would say that
yeah.
those were spiritual lights coming through them. I mean, he was but top critical thinking person in the world, still clinging on to. So do you have any external mechanisms or anything to say, okay, is this my critical thinking or is this my cognitive bias that's just reinforcing what I have? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think cognitive bias comes in a lot for if you want something, you're going to see
Mhm.
it. If you want something, you're going to believe it. And so I always, ask myself, is this bringing me closer to who I want to be? Like, is this information like if I'm trying to give a good example, um, like when someone tells me something, I take the information now and I run it through my own filter to decide whether it works for me or not. I don't just say,
Hmm.
just because you said just because you said something doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it real. It doesn't make it anything for me until I make it something for myself. And
Okay.
so it's kind of like it's not going into anything blindly. It's not taking anything verbatim and just saying, oh, he said it, so it must be true. That's what when I think of critical thinking skills, it's like, that's where it comes in, is being able to run it through your own filter to decide, is this true for me?
So
It
you
may not be
inject a
true for
pause.
you.
You essentially inject a pause. So instead of just taking it and acting, you kind of
Correct.
pause,
And think about
contemplate,
it.
then decide.
Yeah,
Okay.
does it work for me? It's sort of like the same thing. It's like, it's called awareness. You have to be aware of your surroundings, be aware of who you are. When something happens, you can either react or you can respond. And the only way to respond is to take that, what you call a pause, or what I like to call awareness. It's
Mhm.
that moment of awareness to decide, how do I want to respond to this? It's taking a moment. Same thing when I get information. It's like, what do I want to do with this? Is this true for me? Does it work for me? I don't just take it blindly anymore and just say, well, it must be true because Eric's the smartest man in the world. He just said that, so it must be true.
No, that's Keith. Okay, so no, that's fair, and I'm bringing up too because um, I know people who do manipulation and con stuff, and they're ethical, but the most dangerous thing that they can deal with is someone indecisive
Yes.
because they've got to move, and if you're trying to run a con on somebody, and technically a cult is nothing more than a con being run on the same people over and over and
Yeah.
over versus
Hmm.
going to different people, but somebody who's like, I don't know, that can stymie it. If they really run into somebody who's uncertain of everything, it's very hard to manipulate them or get a message through because you're fighting against that pause. And that's what I was talking about, the pause. You mentioned the
Hmm.
awareness. So I'm kind of bringing it up because I feel like that is a good defense. If anybody ever tells you anything, to just kind of
Pause.
go, huh? What? And I never be certain because the only thing I'm certain of is that I'm dumb and that I don't know everything. So I'm going to go try to hopefully find somebody who does, or go find a source who's opposite and then read both or whatever. But okay, from the chat, cute nerd wants to know, how did your husband react to finding out you were in NXIVM when all this was rolling out? Because it was probably surprising to you as well.
Yeah, my husband was he was livid, right? I mean, he was very, very upset.
At
And
you or just the organization?
no, he was mad at he was upset with the organization. He was upset that all this was happening. He was afraid for me because in the very beginning, we really didn't know what was going on. As far as, I mean,
Mhm.
there had been a lot of people were scared. Let's put it that way. People were afraid to tell the truth. People were afraid to let people know where they stood on either side of the fence. Everybody was sort of running in all directions. And my husband's very level-headed. And so he was trying to get the information. We really couldn't get the information. But the first line of defense was get the hell out, which is what I did. And then
Okay.
it was sort of, for me, was looking back on what the hell just happened and trying to put the pieces together. And that took a long time. And doing the documentary for me, being in Seduced, was really helped me put a lot of pieces together. And seeing the other documentary too, The Vow, helped me to put a lot of pieces together. And I'm still putting pieces together as we speak.
Now,
So,
I think I saw something that the filmmakers who did Seduced actually paid for therapy for a lot of the people they were talking to,
yes, they did.
which
Hmm.
I think is great. I mean, that's outstanding. I wanted to point it out because I think that's a
Yeah.
a good way to do it. Because even, okay, I'm talking to you right now, and there's a certain
Hmm.
element, it's salacious, there's branding, and
Yeah.
I can further victimize somebody who's in a cult just by trying to get the bigger story, and
Sure.
I'm always a little bit scared of that. So I really respect the hell out of them for saying, okay, let's bring therapists in. I think not only just to help people, but also maybe as a governor to their intentions, because hopefully a therapist can say, okay, no, you're pushing it too far, or back off here or there, and that's
Sure. It
always a
was.
concern.
The whole set was amazing. It was mostly women, which was really great. And it was a very closed set in terms of
Mm,
like everyone was very careful with everyone. I really felt in the beginning, of course, I didn't want to share my story. It was just, I felt too vulnerable. I felt too exposed. But when talking to Cecilia in the very beginning, Cecilia Peck, she's like, don't you want to use your voice? Don't you want to get out there and let people know about these
mm,
organizations? And that's kind of what spurred me, was that, yes, I do. I don't want other people to have to experience what I went through. And so I was scared. I was nervous, but having people on set, like Rachel Bernstein and Yanya Lalich to help us through some of these things was really phenomenal. Really, really great. I mean, it was a really wonderful experience in that way. And it helped me process a lot, especially being in court when Lauren Salzman was testifying.
yeah, I
It
was
was,
okay. I was wondering about that because as it went down, and we'll probably wrap it up on that. What was happening with you? I can imagine, this is the FBI. Did they get in touch with you? Did they bring you in for questioning? What went down, that
so
you're allowed to say?
um, I was in touch with the FBI,
Mhm.
but nothing that was, it was, I didn't really have any information that was very useful. I did go to the court. Uh, I was in court for a couple of days with the documentary, with Seduced, and I did see Lauren Salzman's testimony, which was super helpful to me. It put so many pieces together. Um, it was a very tentative time for me because I was still processing everything that had happened. Because, after I got out and kind of shut the door on that, I'm okay. I wasn't okay. And so, over a period of time of a little bit of healing, a little bit of processing, and going through everything was, it was difficult. It was really hard. It was very scary, and not knowing. And now I'm just starting to talk to people like Sarah Edmondson, and I'm just
Mhm.
starting to talk to a lot of people that, we were all off the radar for. We didn't know where anyone stood. We didn't know what was going on. So we're all starting to heal. And I think we're looking back on this. I mean, people are probably getting really tired of talking about NXIVM. I know the people that are in it are ready to move on. Like
Sure.
we're ready to move on to the new parts of our lives. And um, we're all doing different things, different projects. I've got the book, and Sarah Edmondson has her podcast, and everybody's are doing things. And we're looking back and reflecting and seeing this experience as a way to learn and to educate people to not get involved in these types of organizations.
What do you think of the outcomes that have happened so far in terms of the criminal prosecutions? Do you think it's balanced? Are you satisfied with it? I mean, Raniere definitely got a pretty stiff sentence, I think, by all accounts.
Yeah,
Allison, I think it was 3.5 years. She just reported in. What was it? Nancy? I forget Nancy was 3.5 years. I don't remember what Allison was.
I think she
And
was like 3 years, and Nancy, I think, was six, 5.5 or six, I think. And
I'm yeah, I have Nancy up here. It's 3.5 years for Nancy. And then Claire Brontman, I think, got some time as
7.
well. Yeah, and now these are pretty big disparities between,
Mm-hmm.
Keith and those by, a multiple factor, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if it is right or not. You were involved with it. You are a victim. I feel of the organization. Do you feel comfortable with the outcomes, and would you change
Well,
anything?
aside from Keith, um, I think everyone else, and this is just my
Sure.
observation, I think that everyone else in the organization had an element of victimization. You know,
Mm,
there were so I would hate to have been the judge, and I think he did a good job being able to find the line between victim and perpetrator. And I think he
mhm.
put a lot of thought into that. I read some of his sentencing memos, and I think he really put a lot of thought into who has the ability to be um, rehabilitated and who doesn't. And I think that went a lot into, because he actually said, which I thought was amazing for a judge, I really liked him, that they're in the business of rehabilitating people. He actually said that in one of his sentencing memos, something like that. And I thought, okay, here's a man who's really looking for the humanity in people. And he's trying to see, he wants people to be rehabilitated. And I think he had to look at who can and who can't. And I think the sentences reflect that.
Wow, that's a great note to end on. You have a book. It's coming out soon.
I do.
Tell us about it.
So I have a book called Unapologetically Glorious coming out soon. It'll be on Amazon. And it's really a book about my experiences through life as being a seeker. It includes a lot about NXIVM, and it's kind of a blueprint of my journey, of how I came from being the seeker and not feeling okay to finding the light, which I call glorious. And glorious is something that we all are born with. We all have it in us. It's all right here. All our answers are right here. And we unlearn that. And I think part of my experience with NXIVM was I had unlearned that part about myself, and getting out of NXIVM, I learned that it really always was there the whole time. So it's about finding the light.
Wow, that's perfect. Most important question of all, and then I'll let you go. Will there be an audiobook?
There will be an audiobook. Yes,
Okay.
I do voiceovers. So yes, there will be an audiobook.
This is very important because while we're on video right now, the majority of my audience, they listen to books. And speaking for myself, I can't read them. I just don't have time, but I listen. So thank you very much for doing that. That will help a lot more people to get that exposure. And thank you so much for coming on.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.